You did. So let's talk today about Friedrich Nietzsche's critique of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, alongside Athens, according to Nietzsche, is one of the two great sources of Western thought. And Jerusalem is the source of Western thought that is especially strongly associated with Judaism and Christianity. Nietzsche was, of course, a great opponent of Christianity. As a young man, he was a sincere Christian, but lost his faith in the university and went on to spend the rest of his life writing books that are hostile to the Christian faith. In fact, actually, one of the sections that we didn't look at in another text here is called the Antichrist. Okay, and so he regularly wrote books about that. Let me talk for a minute about why Nietzsche believed the Judeo-Christian worldview to be such a mistake. And then I'm going to move on from that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a more general criticism of his of modern life. Okay? So we're going to look at Judeo-Christian morality and its essentials, first of all, and then talk about Nietzsche's problem with that. Think about the great moral discourses in the Christian New Testament. Matthew 5 is the Sermon on the Mount. Luke 6, Sermon on the Plain. Galatians 5, Paul discusses the fruits of the Spirit. Okay, Romans has substantial moral discourses throughout it, and others can be found as well. There are certain themes that are common throughout the moral teachings that we find in the New Testament. For instance, Jesus of Nazareth in the Sermon on the Mount tells us that we are to love our enemies. So love is a hallmark Christian virtue and value. We are to be kind to others. Instead of doing evil to others, we are to be kind to them. We are to be self-controlled. We are to control our passions, to keep our instinctual desires from overwhelming us and driving us into sin. We are to be generous. We are to be humble. These are all classic Christian virtues. They're not just Christian virtues. You can find them also in the Jewish tradition preceding the rise of the Christian faith. These are virtues that have been celebrated in the Judeo-Christian background for a long time. But Nietzsche is not impressed by these virtues. He thinks that actually these virtues have had a deeply damaging impact on human beings. Take the virtue of humility, for instance. This is one of the key Christian virtues. You're not supposed to be proud and arrogant. You're not supposed to boast about your own achievements. Instead, you are supposed to be humble. Let others take the credit. Don't put yourself first. Let others receive praise rather than puffing yourself up with these things. For Nietzsche, this humility emphasis in the Judeo-Christian tradition is actually harmful to human beings. How could it be harmful? Let's think this through for a minute. Nietzsche thinks that what the Christian virtues have done is they have weakened us. They have weakened human beings. They have caused us to become feeble shadows of what we would otherwise be. Again, there's this paradoxical approach that Nietzsche takes to the tradition, where the tradition says one thing and holds up one approach to life or virtue or value as being a good. And Nietzsche looks at the tradition and he comes to the complete opposite conclusion. He comes to the conclusion that actually the whole tradition has been mistaken when it comes to what it claims to be good. Okay, and the virtues of Christianity have actually undermined certain more instinctual native passions and virtues. For instance, it is instinctual for human beings to want to push themselves to the front, to want to be first. And for Christianity to come along and to say, no, 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 you shouldn't seek to be first, you should seek to be last. You should seek to give others the credit. Nietzsche would say what this is actually doing is it is enfeebling the people who embody this virtue. Instead of being heroic warrior types like we read about in the Iliad and the Odyssey, texts that precede the Christian era, what we get are saints, people who don't live for themselves, they live for others. And these people are not achieving heroic things, according to Nietzsche. These people are instead weakening themselves by embodying virtues that are pitiful and weak. Let me give you another example. Christianity tells us to love our enemies, not to hate them, not to try to conquer them, not to try to overcome them. But in doing so, it actually undermines a long-standing instinctual human value and virtue. The value and virtue of courage in battle, or of heroic striving against opponents and conquering and winning. If you look at the natural world, the non-human animal world, what we see is that victory goes to the strong. Whoever is strongest eats the others or kills the others. And the strong don't always apologize for their strength. You don't see them trying to be humble or trying to love their enemies or trying to subordinate their own passions and impulses to dominate others. No, 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 no. They simply express them naturally by dominating others. The example Nietzsche uses is the eagles. He says the eagles love to eat the tasty little lambs. They don't apologize for eating the little lambs. They don't stop and wonder whether this is a good thing. No, no, no. They simply express themselves instinctually and courageously by dominating and being who they are. Eagles who eat little lambs. Now, Nietzsche's got a deeper problem with Judeo-Christian morality. This is the surface level problem. The surface level problem is that it has weakened humans when in fact we were told by the tradition that we're getting better and that we're strengthened by virtue of these values. But again, it's been a story that's been mistaken. These virtues have actually weakened us. And Nietzsche sees the history of Western culture not as a history of advancement, but as a history of decline, where human beings become foolish and feeble over time. Okay, so that's the surface level problem with Judeo-Christian morality. Let me now explore a deeper problem that he has with Judeo-Christian morality. Okay, and then I'm going to throw it open for questions so that you guys can look at his criticism of Jerusalem together. The deeper problem is probably best expressed using Nietzsche's own word for it, this French word, ressentiment. Ressentiment just means resentment. Let me tell you a story. A long time ago, there was an ancient people group, the Jews. And the Jews were a weak people who were conquered by everyone. They were conquered by the Egyptians, first of all, in fact, enslaved by the Egyptians. Later on, they were conquered by other groups, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. They were conquered by the Greeks, and eventually the Romans. And the Jews, realizing their weakness and their feebleness as a people group, they got together and they hatched a conspiracy plan. And for Nietzsche, it doesn't really matter whether they consciously got together and formulated this conspiracy. This might have happened actually subconsciously. But it is what Nietzsche thinks happened. And they decided that they needed to find a way to dominate their dominators, to conquer the conquerors. But they realized that they could not do this in battle. They couldn't meet them in an honorable way on a field of battle because they'd lose if they fought the Romans. So what they did was they devised a plan that was a lot like the Socratic plan that Nietzsche talked about in The Problem of Socrates. They devised a plan to get inside the heads of their conquerors. And they sought to actually change the values of their conquerors. Nietzsche thinks especially of the Romans here, but he has others in mind as well. And the idea was to promote a value system that would convince their conquerors no longer to conquer them, and no longer to be conquerors, but instead to feel ashamed of being conquerors. And eventually, the Jewish people settled on the Christian religion as the vehicle for this plan. And again, it doesn't matter to Nietzsche whether or not there really was an active conspiracy, whether this was consciously thought out by the Jewish people. People groups can do things without realizing it. They can subconsciously do things. And at times in Nietzsche's writing, it appears as though this was a subconscious aim of the Jews. But they devised the Christian religion as a way to conquer their conquerors and to get inside the heads of the Romans and to make the Romans feel sorry for being conquerors, to feel ashamed of their strength, ashamed of their power, ashamed of their courage, to see these things as weaknesses rather than as strengths, and instead to embrace values of love and of kindness, of humility and charity, generosity, self-control, to embrace values that were diametrically opposed to the natural values of warrior peoples. And so there's this great reversal that happens. And Nietzsche says this is actually what happened in history. The Jews won. The Jews won using the Christian religion as their vehicle. And they convinced the powerful that it's a bad thing to be powerful. They convinced the strong that they should try to apologize for their strength. And the Jews eventually convinced the whole of the tradition in this great reversal that the last is best, the weakest is what God appreciates and loves the most, and the strongest things of this world are things to be ashamed of or apologized for. And in this way, the Jews came to dominate, even though they never themselves won on a field of battle. Still, they came to dominate because they got into the minds of the conquerors and convinced them no longer to express their values of conquest in a natural way, like they otherwise would be inclined to do. Okay, and Nietzsche actually thinks that the Jewish poison is something that is still with us today. So let's think about this in terms of contemporary American culture, for example. What values do Americans share? Well, two values that Americans share that are present really throughout our founding documents are liberty and equality. I can talk about liberty on another occasion, but right now I want to talk about the value of equality. Equality is a deeply American ideal. I recognize that in practice, the law often is not equal, okay, and often it discriminates against certain groups of people or in favor of the powerful. But still, most Americans, maybe even all Americans, or almost all, would agree that in theory, the law ought to be equal. People ought to be equal before the law. They ought to be treated fairly. They ought not to be treated unequally. Nietzsche says this is all a bunch of bunk. The idea that people are equal is a fiction. They aren't equal in size, in strength, in intelligence. They're all unequal. And for the law to be implemented in such a way that the powerful are supposed to apologize for their strength and weaken themselves in the name of this fiction of equality, all that this does is this ends up harming humanity. No more conquest, no more striving, no more achieving. Instead, there is equal living in mediocrity. Equality as a value may elevate the impoverished, but it brings the powerful down. It knocks them down to a level that they would otherwise not be at. And in so doing, again, it weakens the human impulse to strive and to achieve and to conquer. So Nietzsche would say that actually Judeo-Christian morality, with its emphasis on lifting up the enfeebled, the weak, has infected everything. Even those parts of the modern world that are not themselves explicitly Judeo-Christian. There are many Americans who would not consider themselves Christians who still subscribe to the value of equality. They too have drunk the Jewish poison, according to Nietzsche. Because they're basically functional Jews in their moral views. They have absorbed a view of morality that was invented by the Jews that no previous people thought up. And although they may, many of the people who would say they believe in equality might not believe in Christianity, they might not believe in God, still, morally speaking, they're basically acting like Jews, according to Nietzsche. Because they subscribe to this idea that the weak should be privileged and the strong brought down. All of this has harmed humanity because whereas humans once sought hardship, difficulty, and attempted to overcome these things, now they have become enfeebled, weakened shadows of their natural selves. Let me stop for questions or reflections. Does anybody have any thoughts to share so far before I talk about some related Nietzschean criticisms? Thoughts or reflections, anyone? What do we think of this? Is this, it's certainly a very novel criticism of Western culture, isn't it? It's like a complete flip of all that we hear. We hear that humans were very hostile and hated each other and lost in their sins, and then God sent a plan of escape and assistance. And this involved a complete reversal of natural sinful human instincts and passions. And now humans are told to love each other, to be kind, whereas they once hated. And Nietzsche is saying, no. This has actually all been a mistake. It's harming human beings to love this much. It's harming human beings to be kind in this way because it weakens them. What do we think of this? Oh, it totally is, yeah. You can see that 19th century German anti-Semitism, which erupts in the 20th century in the form of the Holocaust, of course. But you can see traces of it, in fact, more than traces, like explicit anti-Semitism in the 19th century, without a doubt. Good. Other reflections? Yeah, Kendrick?
These are subscription to faith as something debilitating, something
It's debilitating, yeah. It's like a disease. It's like a crutch that people need.
And you feel the same way about law, too?
Good question. the question is really a deep one, very deep one. What does Nietzsche think about the rule of law? He for sure doesn't like the way the law is set up in the United States, because that embodies these Jewish values of equality and so forth. Is he opposed to law as such? I think that here we need to be careful. He's not a systematic thinker. So Nietzsche is, again, he's feeling around for some way of thinking that's different than the Greeks who have dominated us for 2,000 years, different than the Jews who have dominated our thought for 2,000 years. And so he's just trying to feel around for a new way of thinking. He's not really probably considering all the implications of this new way of thinking. And so when it comes to how to be a Nietzschean and live in society, he doesn't seem to be especially interested in that question. I don't see how you can live in society without the rule of law, to be honest. Even if all that counts as law is just the will of the strong man, you still need some sort of, like, some rules. Humans just have to have rules. Yeah, to keep people in check, like there've got to be rules. I just don't see how people can live alongside each other without such things. Even if they're bad rules, there have to be rules still. Questions or comments? Yeah. Last thought on this before we turn to the next topic, Kendrick. Go for it.
Point 3,
Resentment. Resentment. Yeah, the Jews resented the powerful, and so they sought to overcome the powerful in this roundabout way, this dishonorable, deceptive way. They sought to overcome the powerful.
Similar to Socrates with his overcompensating and trying to manipulate people because he was ugly. Okay.
Yeah. This notion that this weak and feebled group attempted to circumspectively get around the natural powers by by mind control. Yeah.
I was trying to see where the resentment came into place. Wait, who's resenting you? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I want to finish today by talking for a little while about a very famous critique of contemporary life. We've talked about Nietzsche's criticisms of Athens and his criticisms of Jerusalem. But Nietzsche was also opposed to the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is a period of time in Western history, in the 18th century especially, when people began to use reason and privileged reason to understand the world around them. And part of that was an explosion of successes in the natural sciences. Look, folks, I need hardly say it, but the way that people live today is really, really different than the way people lived 400 years ago. Much, much more different than the way those people lived in comparison to the way their ancestors lived 400 years earlier. Okay? So it's like it's all accelerating. This whole technological gravy train that we're on started in the Enlightenment era, and now it's just incredible how fast it's moving. The innovations I've seen in my lifetime, that you have seen in your lifetime, are unreal and far exceed anything that our ancestors just a few hundred years ago could have foreseen. But Nietzsche, typically enough, doesn't see all of this as a good thing. Let me list some inventions and technologies that are characteristically used in contemporary life, and then I'll ask you about them. The dishwasher, the washing machine, the dryer, the car, the plane. What do these technologies have in common? Why do they exist? What is their purpose? Yeah, Kendrick.
For our convenience to simplify our lives. Like with plane, we can travel faster. Wash dishwashers, we don't even need to wash them, although we probably should.
Yeah, totally. So it's for our convenience, without a doubt. It is to make life easier. Okay, we have these planes now that take us at incredible speed. Our ancestors could not have even fathomed this. It makes life much, much easier, honestly. Okay, we take it for granted now. So we sit in our planes now, and we learn that there's going to be a delay, and that we won't be able to land right away. We're going to have to circle for another 20 minutes, and everybody complains. Here they are, sitting in a chair in the sky, having traveled at 600 miles an hour for the last 2 hours, and they start complaining because it's not good enough for them. Okay, so human beings now take this for granted. Okay, but for Nietzsche, every step forward in technology has been a step backwards. Okay, and hear him out here. This is a very important and interesting critique. And if there's any part of Nietzsche that I may happen to agree with, at least to some extent, I don't think I agree with him that much, this might be it. Nietzsche says every step forward in technology is a step backwards. What does he mean by that? Well, he means that all of these convenient technologies, these labor-saving devices, have actually weakened us. They have enfeebled us. Let me give you some examples. Okay, I remember speaking personally, back before my smartphone and before I had a contacts list, I memorized phone numbers. You just remembered these things. And now I don't do that. I just scroll to the contact and press the name. My mental capacities are weaker as a result of the technology, is the criticism. Okay, or this one. Before people had smartphones with calculators, they had to do mental arithmetic. They had to do it in their heads. They had to learn how to do it. There weren't calculators around. And yet now we just offload that onto the device, and people don't remember that. Okay, we could point to other examples. I drove my car to school. It wasn't a very long commute. It's about 12 minutes for me. But you know what I did not do? I did not walk to school. I sat in luxuried, air-conditioned ease, listening to music as I drove to school. This conditioned me to an easy existence, one that would be easily upset if my technologies were to fail me. Right, and to take a crazy example, right? If you were to drop me out in the middle of nowhere, outside of this easy conditioned city that I live in, that we all live in, I would have no idea how to survive. I have no idea how to take care of myself. Most of us wouldn't. I think you're supposed to put a little sheet of fabric out over a hole so that it collects dew and you can have some moisture to drink in the morning. I don't know. My Boy Scout days are long past. I can't remember. But again, the technologies and the technological dependence has weakened us, is the criticism. It's weakened us mentally. It's weakened us physically, right? I'm not walking to school. Instead, I'm riding to school. If you look at the incidence of diabetes, the incidence rates of obesity, they're climbing every year as people use more and more these convenience and labor-saving devices. So Nietzsche then sees the so-called advances in science and technology as actually being precisely the opposite. Okay? Because what they've actually done is they've rendered human beings, they have stripped them of their skills, their natural skill sets, and they have rendered them feeble dependents upon devices which do their work for them. What do we think of this? Kendrick?
I actually agree with his mindset, for once.
Right, okay.
I do find while our advances in technology are wonderful, I do also understand that convenience doesn't necessarily always mean it's a good thing. Convenience isn't always in our best interests. For example, let's say the development of plastic. That's great. We can preserve our food. We can cover that, but that's not necessarily the best thing for the environment.
Right.
Just because it's convenient doesn't mean it's the best for us.
Right.
So I can see where he's going. And with your idea with the phone book, we don't need to remember all those numbers anymore. It's already in our phone, but God forbid our phones are gone. What are we going to do?
Right. We'd be helpless. Yeah. So speaking personally, let me just talk about social media for a second. Right. We're all social media addicts these days. Um, Back before social media, people called each other. But now the invention of the new technology undermines that extra effort. The convenience brings about laziness, is what Nietzsche's criticism would have been. I don't know what I think of this. So part of me thinks to myself, well, I guess if I'd lived back before modern medicines and antibiotics, my body would have been tougher because I would have had to fight off illness on my own without the assistance of these medicines, these wonder drugs. But on the other hand, I'd probably be dead. In fact, I would have died at age 3 of an ear infection if I'd lived prior to antibiotics. So I wouldn't trade life today for life at an earlier time. I really like these technologies. They're really nice. It's nice to have them available. What do we think of Nietzsche's criticisms? Is there a way, if he's right, and this is perhaps the one area of Nietzsche that I think may be on target here. If he's right, is there a way to approach these technologies that is healthy and that doesn't weaken our minds and bodies as we use them? What would be the right stance to take? Yeah, Kendrick.
It would be ironic considering his criticism of Christianity. There would be like the idea of humility as well as that idea of prosperity. It's when you moderation, not
Moderation, okay.
not overindulging ourselves with technology, being
Okay.
able to set it aside
Okay.
and live without it, while also having it too when we need it.
Sure. Yeah, my wife and I do smartphone fasts on a regular basis, once a week, so that we don't fall prey to precisely what you're describing. Yeah. Others? What do you guys think? What's the right stance to take towards convenient technologies? Elise? Sure, sure. Yeah, well, it's here to stay. And like I said, I like them. I like these technologies. They do so many things for me. Okay, I can communicate with others across large distances in ways that my ancestors could never have dreamed of. And I love it. I love the fact that I can do that. Yeah.
I'll take a tiny philosopher moment and say something a little controversial. I think it's safe to say most humans are lazy. We like convenience.
Oh, I don't think that's controversial at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we love to just make lives easier for ourselves. That's precisely why we made technology. Um, yeah, like Elise said, it's only inevitable that we would have these technologies, and unfortunately, we've become so accustomed to them. Without them, we're kind of weak, like
Yeah.
Nietzsche would say.
Yeah.
So another thing that could be beneficial would be like boot camps or like Boy Scouts to, I guess, train
Like
us.
intentional efforts to make life harder. To I don't know. Maybe he'd say ditch the car and just trudge in the snow to your work or something like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think that's interesting. When I encounter this part of Nietzsche, I guess I think to myself, yeah, to some extent. Okay? Yeah, to some extent. I think that he makes good points, but I certainly am not willing to ditch it all. probably, I think my stance would be what Kendrick was describing, this moderation approach, where I don't let myself become overwhelmed by the technological world to the point where I'm helpless without it. Anyway, for what it's worth. Friends, let me just say a couple final things since this is our last time meeting together. Thank you so much for your attention this semester. Please do watch the video from Wednesday. Sorry we have to end with Nietzsche, but that's the way the course is structured, actually. I've had a blast this semester. Just to summarize in 2 minutes what we've done, this course has been a fast-paced historical survey course. And the idea has been to take a bunch of different thinkers, we've covered 8 in all before we do our practical ethics topic next time, and to use these thinkers down through history to look at key philosophical topics. So it has not been a topically structured syllabus, it's been a thinker-structured syllabus. But we've used the thinkers to explore key topics. Topics in metaphysics with Plato, topics in ethics with Aristotle, topics in philosophy of religion with Augustine and Aquinas, topics in epistemology and logic with Descartes, topics in philosophy of religion with Pascal, and then in philosophy of science with Hume. And now Nietzsche with his, I don't know what Nietzsche is, to be honest, his criticism of everything. We explore a really, truly original and very influential revaluation of the whole tradition. Folks, the idea has been to give you just a little taste of some different areas of philosophy. Okay, and if you haven't been able to dig into the texts, please take some time, even if just for personal enrichment, to do so. You're only getting half the course if you're just following the lectures and not grappling with these difficult texts. Because part of learning to be a good thinker is dealing with hard thoughts and hard texts and triumphing and succeeding and understanding the meaning that's contained there. All right, so thank you again for your attention. I'm going to go ahead and let you go now. And